Good evening, everyone. I would like to call today's Student Achievement Committee meeting to order. Can I first have approval of our Student Achievement Committee meeting minutes for November 18th, 2025?
Motion to approve.
Second.
So,
Thanks, Lynn.
okay, we're good? Okay, all right.
I don't know if we actually had it.
So do we need to vote?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, I don't think they.
Did I start too soon?
She's covering for Ms. Cooper, so
Okay.
I'm trying to help her set up.
So the motion to approve the Student Achievement Committee meetings for committee meeting minutes for November 18th. The motion was by Ms. Edmonds, and it was second by Dr. Ng. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
They have been approved. Today we have Dr. Hill and a host of wonderful other people with us to talk about student well-being and behavioral health discipline practices, as well as seclusion and restraint. And I know Ms. Edmonds mentioned this at the top of her meeting, but I also would like to offer my condolences and my thoughts and my prayers to the families, the staff, and the students of the schools who were affected by today's most recent news from Willow Springs High School, Willow Springs Middle, and Lincoln Heights. I think this discussion is very timely, and I will kick it on over to Dr. Hill.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gordon, and good afternoon to everyone. Before we begin, I would like to introduce you all to our new Assistant Superintendent for Instructional Service, Dr. Sajana Latin-Jower. She's sitting right over there. Just wanted to give her an opportunity to put a name with a face before we begin our discussion this afternoon. So when we're looking at advancing student well-being and behavioral health and discipline practices, this afternoon we do have Dr. Deshauna Guthrie with us, Dr. Paul Walker, and we have one of our legendary leaders, Ms. Altonia Ransom, who's going to be with us and sharing with us an update of some things that are going on at her building site as well. We've been working to bridge that gap between our current challenges and our future goals that we have. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation this afternoon as we look at our work in this particular area. Before we examine the work and our data, I want to state our desired outcomes and the essence of why involved with this work. Why do we get the essence of why we're involved with this work? At our core, we want to provide those multi-tiered systems of support regarding our students' well-being, and today we're going to define and revisit our behavioral health framework, summarize our suspension trends, outline our behavioral interventions and supports for our students, share what next steps we have on deck, and our goals for continuous improvement and those enhancements regarding our behavioral health practices. As always, we are in alignment with our strategic plan underneath the priority of student disposition and well-being, and we will go through some of those aims that we have for those highlighted areas of our strategic plan. So the first nugget of information we want to talk about is understanding behavioral health. our approach to behavioral health treats behavioral health as the foundational pillar for overall wellness. A student's mental, emotional, and their social factors all have an influence on how that student's overall well-being and their ability to, in fact, achieve and progress in school. We want to look from the lens of being proactive with our support involving social-emotional learning, behavior management, and the mental health needs of our students. And coupled with all of this is a foundation to have supportive school environments and our enhanced community partnerships. We know that behavior is, in fact, relational. And I think James Comer penned it best when he said, no significant learning can take place unless there are significant relationships. So we know that behavior is, in fact, rooted in relationships. Second nugget, behavior is intentional. It is required to provide our students with effective strategies. We need to make sure that we're teaching them these strategies in order for them to navigate with their behavior. And that our current focus is on proactive versus reactive. What is it that we can do to prioritize to reduce any infractions? As we examine our behavioral health framework, and you will see this slide repeated in our seclusion and our restraints presentation, when we look at those areas of restorative and trauma-informed practices, the school-wide expectations, social-emotional learning, tiered behavior resources, and finally classroom management, all of those are the essence and comprise what we say is our behavioral health framework. When we look at restorative practices, how is it that we are responding and giving the necessary tiers of support for our students, and how do we at the beginning of each school year take time to actually teach these restorative practices and put them as a part of our practices? We want to make sure that we are sharing with our educators, our students, and the division that this work will help us to gain further feedback and consideration. And we want to make sure that we're designing and always revisiting our framework to work and support for our schools and their unique characteristics. When we talk about the school-wide expectations, schools have a responsibility to ensure that those expectations are in fact communicated and they're very explicitly taught to each of the students. How do I, as a student, behave in the cafeteria? What are the expectations for me in the hallways, in the bus ride for my routes, restroom? Is the message that we're giving to them, is it in fact consistent? When we talk about from the lens of social emotional learning, that's a part of our core. How are we being very explicit with our instruction to help our students to gain their confidence, set their individual goals, make better decisions, collaborate with others in work and play, and navigate the world more effectively? I hope that we will always glean from that we're teaching children strategies with their behavior as opposed to just punishing them when they do not reach those expectations. When we examine tiered behavioral resources, what are those levels of tiers as we're being very responsive that provide increasing structures and supports to our students so that they are in fact able to flourish, interact in that school environment in the most effective way? And those tiered resources will increase the structure, the frequency, and the duration as we increase the need of intensity. Classroom management. I think my father gave me some very valuable advice when he told me my first day of teaching, you cannot teach anything unless you have management so that the children understand how they're going to flourish in a classroom. What are those expectations? What are the consequences? And the key is being very consistent in that learning environment so that everybody understands how we're going to conduct and handle business. This slide represents our behavioral health strategy, and it's that three-tiered system approach. We want you to look at this not from the lens of how we are labeling our students, but as a way to label our services that we're providing for them. The goal is simple. We want to provide the right level of support at the right time to ensure that every single student in our buildings are receiving the necessary supports. At the base, we have Tier 1, which covers most of our students, all of our students. And these are our universal supports, things like explicit social emotional learning curriculum. And in our classroom, what are those positive behavioral reinforcements, the school-wide expectations, the classroom expectations? If that Tier 1 core is strong, it should successfully meet the needs of about 80% of our student body. It is our primary wellness net. As we transition to supplemental, more targeted support, what is that extra layer of scaffolding support that we can provide for our students who may need some additional other than just the core? And when we look at intensive, there are some of our students that need that individualized behavior support. What are those plans that are going to be very prescriptive and unique to the needs of our students? Our specialists do in fact have the bandwidth to actually provide these students the high level of attention that they do require. And so therefore, know that this is our consistent framework of how we're trying to build capacity and awareness, looking at early identification. What is the proactive preventive approach? What is our evidence-based intervention? How do we look at referrals and that intake process? And then giving guided support services for our students and their unique needs. Dr. Paul Walker now is going to take us through our 24-25 summary discipline data as we look at this, and this is a requirement for us to report these measures and this data annually.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Hill. And so it all starts at the school level when looking at this. Our principals, of course, are on the ground, and they're responsible for making calls about discipline that gets into our system, and our current system is Infinite Campus. Of course, they're the primary source of everything that we're talking about today. And as Dr. Hill said, that this summary discipline report, and I'm going to speak to it more, but you see on the side, we really want to clarify that introductory calls, right, as required by law. And that describes what we have to do. That also mimics, it's also in our policy, policy 4345, that we talk about why we do what we do here with the data. So just as a reminder, of course, who am I, right? What do I do? So while principals are responsible for really the doing here, in the sense of when there's an exclusionary practice, my department is the district accountability really for the reporting of it, right? It all comes through me in the sense of compliance. That's where my office comes in. So we look at the out-of-school suspension data as well as other things. The next thing we'll talk about after this is seclusion restraint, but we'll also discuss in-school suspension. And we make sure it's accurate in the sense of policy. I often say we are the department that says, can you suspend? Should you suspend? Well, that's up to the principal of what they do in their building. When it comes to more high-level kind of criminal activity and things of that sort, that's where I partner with the security department to talk about things like persistently dangerous levels or sexual offenses. So we partner with that. And so you're going to see the data. You'll notice we're going to break it down by race. We're going to look at it gender, where there's be some aspects of disability. And we don't, again, do that just because we want to. It's the right thing, but also the law kind of requires that we look at it in that way. And so again, the why, we bring this to you every year. It's not to check a box. We want to get an honest look. We've got to have the data. The data drives us to determine where we need to focus our energy. And so as we get into it, we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Dr. Hill. So this is where the big picture here. And so we got out-of-school suspension, right? And then we've got in-school suspension right there in the middle. And then we have alternative learning center. So let's start with, again, out-of-school suspension. So it's important to ground ourselves in the fact that our schools, for the vast majority of our students, on average, and I'm going to just say it's 96%. So 96% of our students never experience an out-of-school suspension. And that's not just for last year. That's really been for the past several years. That has been where roughly 4% of our student body experienced the particular suspension. So this suggests that our Tier 1, as Dr. Hill was going over the behavioral framework and the things that we do here, that's clearly a testament that it's working in the sense of school climates are successfully keeping nearly our 160,000 students in the classroom and in the learning community. And so, however, the reality is, of course, is that other kind of 3.54% here. We can consider that a small margin, but remember that those are about 8,000 students. And a suspension is more than just a missed school day. It's a disruption. The social emotional safety net of many students. And from a health and well-being perspective, there are 8,000 moments where a student's connection to their school community, right, it's severed. That's a challenge for any particular student. What I also want to say about when sticking with really this out-of-school suspension is, and we're going to talk about, again, more of the number of students, but most of them, when you know this word recidivism, they're mostly one and done. And so around 80% of the students that actually receive a suspension, they receive it one time. And they don't have a second incident, and we might say that's, again, one and done. And so that reminds me of a word kind of resilient, maybe, right? That they made a mistake, it resulted in an out-of-school suspension, and they say that we're not going to do that again. So they have that single kind of corrective moment here. And I'm going to go through more of the definitions of out-of-school suspension and the layers, but let me just go to in-school suspension. So in-school suspension, again, it's not a made-up kind of term, right? That's also embedded in a lot of statutory language and, of course, in our policy. And to put it in parent-friendly terms, because while I'm in front of you as the board, I want parents to completely understand, this is when a student cannot really be in their regular classroom for an assortment of reasons. It's more than a timeout. Right, timeout, maybe they're out of the classroom for 5-10 minutes and then, hey, you swoop them back in. Maybe they're disrupting the lesson, they're dysregulated, there's some kind of conflict, and the law, right, legislators know that there's times that you need to do something like an in-school suspension where they stay on campus, they're supervised somewhere in a room or something of the sort. It might be for an hour, it might be for a lunch period, it might be for the whole day, right? But anytime they're out of their classroom for any type of behavioral incident, we do have to document that for in-school suspension. And we have roughly on average 15,000 to 20,000 cases of in-school suspension. But again, 93% of our students never experience an in-school suspension, and that has been pretty consistent. AOC is something, so it gets into the numbers. Again, everything Dr. Hill was laying out, these Tier 1, Tier 2, and AOC might be more of a Tier 2-ish, maybe a little bit of a Tier 3, depending how long they're in there. That is a Wake County construct. That's where we have gone above and beyond every middle school, every high school, certified teacher, full-time. So this is where the goal here is to keep the kid in the building. That's it. That's the goal. And if they have to be in there for a longer period of time, that they're getting instruction by someone who was taught to give the instruction. So that is really the goal of ALC. And it's utilized, again, it's 1%, but that's hundreds of kids, thousands of kids perhaps, that may be utilizing ALC every year here. So again, why this matters, all of that with the ALC and ISS, we're saying, hey, you're having a hard time, but Johnny, you still belong here, right? It's not something that we think you need to be out of school, and we try to prevent any type of disconnection here. Thank you, Dr. Hill. And so when looking at this one, again, 24-25, we lead really with this data as well because it's a transparent review of students when looking at the comparison to enrollment and race here. And when looking at that, in this context, let's talk about disproportionality. I'm not a math person, but disproportionality is a mathematical term. And it simply refers to an overrepresentation here. And it's a quantitative observation, really. And so when you look at the numbers and we see certain numbers like African-American students, and we highlight this, we have minimal numbers for out-of-school suspension, but you've seen this before, and it doesn't matter what year, it often stays the same here. 21 or 22% of our population are black students, but they continually comprise of a good 57% of the particular suspensions. And so that is a targeted group that we need to look at when we're looking at this particular data. And so when we look by race, that's when we realize, oh, there is something where we have to focus, and this is at every school level. And with any principals that are hearing this or watching it later, right, I always tell principals, how about your school? What's your numbers looking like in your building when it comes to this exclusionary practice? Thank you. I think we can move on here. This is several years, right, trend here, and this is really a snapshot. I want to just make sure to put an asterisk. We all know what was going on in 2019-20. Feels like a long time ago, but remember March of 2020, schools closed, right? So that's a complete outlier, 2021. But I have it there, right? We want to document that. And then you see the other trends here. This is a place where I just want to take an opportunity to explain, and it's really for also with families who may not understand these definitions. So short-term suspension is 1 to 10 school days. Principal imposes that, 1 to 10 days. When it comes to the rec for long term, that's the principal asking for more than 10 days, right? More than 10 days, that's what a rec for long term is. And so then we get into, well, what's a long-term suspension? And this is very key, and this is where we fumble sometimes as a district. So as you see, just for last year, right, we had 13,473 short-term suspensions. There were several of those that were rec for long-term, so we had about 1,400. But 15 were long-term suspensions. So I'll tell a principal often that if you recommend it long-term and the student is at Connections Academy, they are not long-term suspended. That's so important. We have not attached that designation to those students. River Oaks, go down the line, all my alternative schools, SCORE. Students at SCORE are not long-term suspended, but we still keep saying it. They are not. They are disciplinary reassigned. On their record, it's a short-term suspension. What's not on here? Expulsion. Board, you're the only entity that can do that. And recommendation from Dr. Taylor, the superintendent, an expulsion is a permanent removal, right, from school enrollment. So those are the definitions, so I just wanted to clarify that. And Dr. Taylor's He has a designee for all recommendations. It's a discipline review committee, 2 area soups, and Assistant Superintendent Lisa Allred, and then Michelle Woodson, Assistant Superintendent here. And so when looking at the next one here, we see the students, so the unique students, again, for my community members and for families, this is really where I, again, speak to them, because these are numbers that often sometimes could get confusing. So this is the statement. Last year, 7,921 students were suspended. They made up 13,473 suspensions. Sometimes in the community they say, well, why are you using the lower number when you talk about it? Well, you have to understand unique students. Of course, what is that telling us? Multiple students had multiple suspensions, right? And so, again, that gives you the trend of what we look at. So, remember, we've got 160,000 kids. When we see 7,900, that's every single kid in that number matters, and yet also it's a very reasonable number for any targeted supports there. All right, so maybe the last one, Dr. Hill, that we'll talk about. And so this is just the comparative. So every year NCDPI does the consolidated report, and I want to point out, this is not 24-25. This is 23-24, right? Because this is the most recent that we had at the time as we were kind of putting this out there. So I put this in front of you every year as well, right? And every year, when compared to a lot of our, what I might call sister districts, we're the lowest rate. I want to clarify, we are not the lowest rate in the state of North Carolina, right? When you look at all the counties, but when we just look at rates per these particulars, then we are, again, lowest here. So what does this tell us? It's kind of how we started with the 96%. This tells us that we have a commitment to students, we have a commitment to improvement, and so with that, I think it's a good segue to pass it off to my colleague.
Thank you, Dr. Walker.
Thank you, Dr. Gooch.
As we work to talk about some of the ways in which we want to address and support teachers and students, we want to talk a little bit about our department. You may notice last year we were Behavioral Health Support Services. This year we're the Office of School Climate. And here are the 5 tiers of support that we have implemented. So we partner with each of the senior directors in the regional model. We have a comprehensive professional learning where we do some of the areas that Dr. Hill mentioned, where we provide classroom management. We're very pleased to share that this year we provided an asynchronous course for bus drivers to develop relationships with students and figure out ways to support students in staying on the bus. We also work with core restorative practices and lots of other core strategies. And so we provide a variety of professional learning throughout the year. We take each calendar and provide up to 2 professional learning days during each of the calendar's work days so that principals don't have to invest in saving money to send their staff. It is on one of their work days. As we look at the second one, we think about capacity building. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We're going to talk about a program that we devised this year. As we look at learning walks, that is then connected back to level 3 of our learning model where we focus on student well-being, and we have been doing a variety of walks in SLM, the principals meetings, as well as individual schools ask us to come out and conduct learning walks. And what we do is help them to develop baseline data and develop a place to work from, and depending on their tier of support, we'll also create customized professional learning for them and their staff. When we think about tier intervention support, we obviously want to be proactive. We want to stay with tier 1, but we recognize that we have students in crisis across the district. So what we have devised is a way for principals to reach out to us, and within 48 hours, we respond and we deploy a coach who will then do an observation of the student in crisis, work with the team to begin the process of developing a FBA, a functional behavioral assessment, and a bit of behavior intervention or support plan for the student. That is often work that our staff is not as familiar with. So coaches and other staff in our department will go to the school and work with the school and do an initial visit and then a follow-up to make sure that they've gotten that started for the student to assist them in being able to remain in school. And then last but not least, any principal in the district can reach out for a consultation, whether it is about having challenges with their TWC or whether it is about an individual student or professional learning or anything else within the purview of school climate. So I just wanted to take an opportunity to share a little bit about how we support schools before we transition into the specifics of what we wanted to share today. So Dr. Walker talked a little bit about the data. We worked with him to look at where are these things happening. And it's not surprising that most of the infractions are occurring in the classroom. That's where students spend the bulk of their time. And so once we confirmed through the data that things were happening in the classroom, as a team, we decided to target supports for classroom teachers. We developed the classroom management support process. As of today, we have supported 29 individual schools, 120 teachers, and over 2,478 direct hours. And when we say direct hours, that is on site. One of the things that's different about our coaching model is that principals, along with area superintendents, we work with area superintendents to select the schools. Most of them are level 4 support schools in the model of support. And they selected the principals, and the principals selected the teachers. The coaches go out Thursday, Friday, and Monday in the first round, and they're there on site working with those 4 teachers all day long. And so the teachers can say, can you come observe my classroom? They'll do an observation and they'll provide feedback. They'll say, hey, I want to do more collaborative learning, but the class erupts whenever I move them around. And they'll model how you move students and maintain order. They also help the teachers to work on a goal, so they can set a goal that's tied to the school's improvement plan or their own PGPs, and they help them work towards that goal. They also just assist the teachers with a variety of things. We've had some situations where it was just setting up the classroom. Lots of the teachers they serve are coming from non-traditional backgrounds and they don't know how to set up a classroom. We've been in situations in kindergarten classrooms where we sort of set them up as secondary spaces, and the coaches would assist them with, well, no, they can only take about 15 minutes of instruction, so we want to make sure they've got circle time and thinking about putting them in pods and things of that nature. So our coaches, again, model those effective strategies. They can help teachers co-create a classroom management plan. After the first round of a month of service, 3 days a week, because there are 29 schools, we then move into 1 day a week for each school, and the coaches are rotating to each of their schools 1 day per week. Here's some initial feedback. So from teachers, they are feeling as though they're being heard. And often in lots of the support that they receive, they commented in the beginning there was some hesitation at some schools. Teachers felt like, well, are you just going to come in and give me a long list of things? In this situation, they felt that they had feedback and not just a list of things, but a person that they could count on being there consistently to assist them, not only with setting up their classrooms, but building long-lasting student relationships. We had a second teacher to respond that talked about their own emotional support. Lots of our teachers are coming from non-traditional backgrounds and needing their own layers of emotional support. And very often for beginning teachers, having another adult in the classroom helps them build their confidence that they can do it. And then last but not least, we had a principal who shared that something that we're all aware of. It's really hard to be the instructional leader when you're constantly being called out of other classrooms when you're trying to observe and support for behavioral infractions. And so because we have coaches on site, if there were a student in crisis, the coach on site could support the student who was in crisis as well. And now I want to turn it over to Forest Pines Drive. We have Ms. Branson here. We supported her last year when we came. We highlighted the school. We wanted to continue in that path this year. Essentially where we are in terms of her incidents for this school year, if you see the blue bar, that was the total number for the entire school year. The pink bar is a trend line, which should tell you if she were on track for the same number of infractions at this time of the year, that's where her green bar should be, but she is much lower. And that is based on some of the interventions you see at the right. Level 3 walkthrough, she's allowed us in her building to conduct those and create some baseline data and build some awareness with the staff. She's had a full-time coach who's done classroom observations and feedback. We've done some on-site professional learning with the staff, as well as classroom management plan development and some core restorative practices training for her team. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to her.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Altanya Bransom. I'm the proud principal of Forest Pines Drive Elementary School. I started in July. And so the data in the blue, that represents the last school year. Going into this school year, we knew we had to hit the ground running. Looking at our teacher working conditions survey, having one-on-one meetings with staff, we knew we had to have 3 main priorities, and the first one was going to be a safer Forest Pines Drive. You cannot have high academic achievement if the classroom is not safe. So I immediately reached out to Dr. Gooch because I knew I was going to need some support going into this school year and doing some things differently. She said, okay, we'll talk to your area soup. Dr. Council supported the collaboration with the school climate coaches, and what it really impressed me was before they began working in the building, the coach and Dr. Gooch and the team, they came out and they spoke with the admin team first. And they learned about our culture and where we have been and where we were trying to go. And then they met with the staff that they were going to be working with. And they're working with experienced teachers, and they were also working with newer teachers. And once those relationships were formed, that's when they began to work inside of the classrooms with the teachers. What did they do? Classroom management, best practice training, organizational strategies, parent conference and communications, help them write emails, addressing diverse student needs, social emotional learning with kids, and just fostering positive relationships with students. They have modeled for our staff members. They've done some co-teaching side by side. They've done observations and feedback, and they've helped them with their instructional planning. I've seen the data that is taken, and it is rather impressive. I've not asked for a copy of it because I feel like that is part of the coach and the coachee relationship, but the data that is given is excellent. And not just giving someone data, you can drop data in their laps, but help them analyze it, reflect, and then create a plan. And then the next week when we come back together, we're going to see, did our plan work? And if it didn't, we'll make those adjustments together. How do my staff members feel about the coaching? Some of them would like to participate in the school climate coaching round, but we'll talk about that outside of the meeting. Our teachers feel supported, they feel heard, and when they're meeting with their coach, it's a judgment-free zone. They can say what they need to say, they can talk about what worked well, what didn't work well, what their next moves are going to be. But this is their coach, this is their support system, this is their advocate. Like I said, I am a big fan of this program. I've seen the work that it has helped us do in our building. And I came back to Dr. Gooch after the 6 weeks and I said, can we please have another cycle? And if another school doesn't need the coach, I'll take them. And she said, well, let me talk to some people. And then when she came back and offered today, I said, I'll take it. I'll take 1 day a week. We'll offer up a classroom, whatever you need from us, because we started something good and we want to continue on because it's going to be great. Just looking at our data right now, yes, we've got some work to do, but we are very proud to see that our incidents have come down. Now, we still document everything, but putting a lot of these practices into place, that has attributed to that number coming down so significantly. So I just appreciate you all giving me the floor for just a few minutes to speak about the work that we're doing at our school. We're very excited to see our end of year numbers, even though it's so far away, it's so close. And we're going to continue to collaborate with Dr. Gooch and her team. I can't speak to their responsiveness. that 48 hours that she speaks about, that is true. And within 48 hours, the team was around our conference room and they were helping us in some of our more challenging situations. So I appreciate you giving me this few minutes. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them about the school climate coaches.
So as we transition and we look at restorative practices, we know that the research is clear regarding the increased academic achievement, narrowing equity gaps, and looking at the holistic approach of how are we building strong school communities, fostering positive relationships, and resolving conflicts constructively. And so therefore, that is what this work is embedded in, and that's what we're relying on to make sure that we have those evidence-based practices and research. As we look at next steps and where we want to take this work, our ultimate goal is to make sure that we're increasing behavioral supports and reducing suspension rates through a proactive intervention lens. And how we look at expanding our student wellness programming and those restorative practices, but at the same time, reviewing our data, looking at how our children are, and making sure that we are in alignment with that outcome data to, in fact, inform decision-making and address those trends proactively. So therefore, the steps that we have taken, looking at our plan for increasing restorative practice professional learning at the core level, at the intensive level, and also focus on those schools with those disproportionate numbers. The teacher incidents, one data system in which Infinite Campus allows us to house all of those incidents so that we can have one system in order to review and see how our students are doing. Multi-tiered systems of support. How are we looking at those structures to problem solve with our data at both the school level and the district level? At this time, are there any questions regarding this report and this update?
Well, thank you, Dr. Hill, and everyone who has presented today. This was really great information. I specifically want to say thank you. It is great to hear firsthand educators, boots on the ground, like what's working. And I loved hearing how you specifically talked about culture. And we know that that goes hand in hand with behavioral health and well-being. And I've said that several times at this table, and I will continue to say it. But thank you all so very much. I did want to say before I went around the table and asked my colleagues to give their comments and their questions. I know a lot of the data that was presented to us looks gleaming. And I will just say, I don't necessarily have a question about it, but I will just say that it's going to take us a really thorough effort for us to be transparent about what is happening with our data. And I think you all have done an excellent job with doing that. I just hope that we continue to carry that out. And thank you, Dr. Walker, for explaining exactly what those numbers meant. Because while we see that a 3.5% may look small, like understanding that 3.5% is roughly 8,000 students, that's a lot. But I appreciate the work that you all have done, and so I will turn it over to my colleagues for any questions or comments.
Thank you. So you're in 29 schools. Is that who you're able to serve? Could you serve more? And how did that 29 number come from the most incidents, where the most incidents are occurring, and that's how those schools were chosen?
So as we transition over into Infinite Campus, we couldn't necessarily rely on our first year's data because it's transitional data. So what we did was partner with the area superintendents and their contextual knowledge of the schools, as well as each of the schools on the list are a part of either last year or this year designated by the state as a low performance school.
And how many coaches do you have? I have a couple of follow-ups.
Yeah. Currently I have 8.
8. Okay. Okay. I did have another question, but it escaped me, so I'll stop there. Thank you. Any other further questions? Okay.
Yes, thank you so much. Couple of questions. First, I understand, I mean, everything that takes place at the school level. How do you incorporate the families, the parents, into the solution? Because in order for something to stick, you gotta have buy-in from the parents as well, the people at home, so that you can have consistent, So what does it look like in real world examples?
I'll say from my perspective, so for instance, when we go in and do an observation of a student for a Tier 3 student in crisis, we work with the student support services team to ensure that the parent has been contacted and is aware and in support of that service for their student. When we are working in the classroom with the teachers, we are constantly talking about not just school-wide expectations and classroom expectations, but family engagement is part of that. Sometimes schools will ask us, well, can you give us some ideas? And we'll talk with them about providing things on social media about sleep time for students, providing simple, direct messaging for families about technology and why it matters, providing supports and resources for them at math night, literacy night, things that they can provide to parents to help bring them into the conversation around behavioral health.
Yeah, thank you so much, because I think that parents are a lot of times don't know where to go in terms of how to get the help to fix a problem or fix a situation. So I think that's good that you're incorporating them into that mix. And then for Dr. Walker, we had mentioned in the past, the term alternative learning, and what does that, there had been mention about kind of like the punitive connotation to alternative learning center, and so have we made any progress in terms of looking at that, kind of way of changing the mindset of this.
And Dr. Amy,
Oh, good. I thought Dr. Gill had something now. Oh, okay.
I've talked to Michelle Wilson about that. It's part of the general statutes of what we have to have, that language in there. So it's part of that. But, SCORE, Academy, the things that we're trying to do to promote what are the positive aspects that are going on. But Michelle's understanding and what she shared with me and updated when that request came is part of that general statute that has to have that accompany alternative learning in there to show that that is an alternative learning.
Well, I mean, certainly, the learning part is very important, right?
Yes.
That is the key part of it. But how do we change the perception that it is a punishment rather than a different learning environment? Maybe you have some input on that as well, because we've had the discussion before. We've all had that.
Yeah, what I would say is that as Michelle reviewed, there's going to be the statutory language that you have to have in terms of reporting. But I think ultimately in the end that doesn't necessarily impact some of the vernacular that we use. And so I think that's probably the part that we're going to have to navigate through, that when we report to the state, our general statutes, this is what we're giving you, but it is about how we change the nature of what that language means in our vernacular. So we just still got to work through that and make sure we don't violate the statute, because they like to get us.
And I'd like to add as well, I want to make sure, especially with families and our partners in the media, that we don't confuse alternative learning centers, right? That is a Wake County construct. So if there's something in that name, right, but it's an alternative learning center, that's just what we call it. That is not an alternative school. That's separate, right? And we have alternative schools. But yeah, it just gets to families where, we're not going to beat around the bush. If they have a disciplinary assignment to Connections Academy and they ask me, is it an alternative school? Yes. That's in a sense of a statutory sense, when we apply for a school to be an alternative school, we apply for them to be an alternative school, right? And so there's no way around that. We own the connotation. Let's us at this table change that connotation and focus on learning. And that's what we say, that these are students that just want and need something different. It's not all in the sense of a bad situation in that sense. So yeah, I think it starts with us. Thank you.
After you share my thoughts, I've been beating that horse so much I don't have to say it anymore.
Okay. I have a couple of questions of my own. In the very beginning, Dr. Hill, you talked about, or it may have been you, Dr. Walker, you talked about care and consistency and how behavioral health also involves social factors. Kind of to Dr. Ng's point, at what point are we making sure that, number one, families and parents know like how their child progresses along that tiered support model? And then two, how well, along with that, how well are we informing and educating parents around what is an in-school suspension? What is an out-of-school suspension? How do we get to this point? What constitutes an out-of-school suspension? Like, is it time-bound? Is it, like, what are the specific things that determines whether it's an in-school suspension? And you talked about, like, disruption and a student being dysregulated. How do parents know that, and how do staff understand the differentiation between this child is dysregulated or causing a bit of a disruption versus this child needs in-school suspension? I know that was a loaded question.
So I'm going to start with, I think, the more technical, right? And what you're asking, a lot of it is the can versus the should, right? And when we listen to our schools and principals, right, we put them in positions to make that judgment about discipline and what has to happen. And each circumstance is different, right? We like consistency, but no situation is consistently the same, right? And so I just kind of start with that. So when it then comes to kind of the law and saying, why do we call it in-school suspension? Well, remember, students have an opportunity and a privilege and a right to be in their classroom. If we take them out, and that's what the state says, if we take them out for disciplinary reasons, you have to document that, right? Because we already see that 80% of the students who are involved in out-of-school suspension and ISS and even AOC are Black and Latino students. So we want to track that. And so when it comes down to the bare bones definition of in-school suspension, remember that really is about an hour, right? Now, if you want a particular minute, we don't have one, right? Is it 39 minutes to 40 minutes? What's 59 minutes, Paul? Is that right? It's about an hour that it may be concluded as in-school suspension, that they're outside of their regular classroom. And so the communication to families, right? And we have many parents and many different understandings. And so what I would say is that I would expect that that schools, I know when I was an administrator, we start the beginning of the year and continually saying, hey, these are kind of the rules, the code of conduct, and here are the layers of what can happen. And I would think the first layer starts with how we're going to keep you in the building, right? Warnings, lunch detentions, parent conferences, all those fun stuff, right? That is normal. And then it's layers. You got to come out the classroom for timeout. You got to have something in school suspension that we communicate. And then, unfortunately, if it has to happen, an out-of-school suspension. And so that's how I would think it would be communicated, at least. So I just took a stab at it, and I'll let my Dr. Hill and colleagues respond as need be. But How's that work for you?
Thank you,
Yeah,
Dr. Walker.
okay, sure.
And Chair Gordon, again, due process. What are those things that we have to ensure that no child or their family's rights have been negotiated? So therefore, there are due process things that have to be in place and have to be followed in order to make sure that they are being given every consideration.
Thank you. I think Mrs. Martin has a follow-up.
Oh, did you have something, Dr. Rich? Oh, okay, okay.
So I know some of the concerns, we hear from families, whether it's in those due process appeals or disciplinary appeals, is the notification process. Some principals do a great job of notifying families immediately. Some principals, when time is convenient. So what is the district's expectations for notifying those families when there is a disciplinary issue? Kind of following up to Ms. Gordon's question, and then what training and/or practices needs to be put in place to ensure that all students and all principals are notifying families when those situations may arise?
Good. Yeah. So it's law, right? In a sense of out-of-school suspension, that it says by that day, by the end of that working day, and no later than the following day, right? So let's just start with that. Now, we got over 650 administrators, roughly, right? Does that sometimes not happen within those timeframes? Yes, perhaps. And that's where the learning, and I don't have schools really consistently, right? There might be circumstances and nuance, but they have to follow, and that's our law, and then of course it's in our policy that it has to be communicated. So we'd rather not, Chair Swanson, have it be, at your convenience that you let the parent know. Well, no. And that's where the accountability comes in. So of course, with me and the legal and compliance, but area superintendents, right? They're also partnering with them, right? They support the principals, but the principals have to know, right? Hey, if you tell Johnny that he's suspended, right? Yeah, you can't get the paperwork 3-4 days later. That's just not reasonable, right? So really what you're talking about is the very popular word district then accountability, right? There's responsibility at the school level, but how are we accountable and making sure that, yes, our team is on the phone often, right? And making sure that if there's a particular time gap that we are following up, and we are an ongoing professional learning. Sometimes it's like, hey, when do you do training? All the time. All the time. We're talking to schools and making sure they're doing the right thing here.
So, Madam Chair, if I could add to that, the answer is we will follow the law. And so as Dr. Walker said, it's pretty explicit in terms of the time frame of when they should contact. And we know that when it comes to in-school suspension, people may view that differently in terms of what it is or what it isn't. But anytime that they are in that realm, we have a duty to report, and they have to do that. And when that does not happen, that is also part of an evaluative process with principals in terms of area superintendents begin to get feedback or information from parents about not having due and timely notice. That becomes a part of an evaluation that has to be reflected there. Now, Mrs. Already, I didn't mean to pull you into this conversation, but I'll see if you have any input that you want to add. But we also have to be explicit and specific about when we talk about SPED students, because when we pull them out, there's also a violation that could be occurring. So I'll yield to our resident expert that I used to be 20 years ago, but I'm no longer that person. But
well, as you know, that's where manifestation comes in play, right? And truly, anytime we remove the children, we need to be counting that child, unless those special ed and regular ed services are being provided. And so we got schools to count those days, and when they get to that 11th day, they've got to have that manifestation to make sure that that discipline in question was not somehow a manifestation of their disability. And it was, to go right back to the school. So that would be the guidance we give them on that.
And so thank you for that. And finally, I look at things as a parent. If my child were removed for any reason, no matter how long or short, I simply expect somebody from the school to call me and say, Robert had a little incident. We had to take him out for 10 minutes a day, but not to share that information. That's a problem for me, and I just have no other way around it other than we've got to comply and be in contact with parents.
So I remembered the other question I wanted to ask. I think it'd be helpful to see pre-pandemic data. So because you have to report this annually, do you have it like listed on a specific page, like where the reports are? Because the pandemic years, which I consider there are two, really are outliers. And so I would find it helpful to see a couple, maybe 3 or so years prior to pandemic. So, and if it's okay with the chair, if you could just send that to us in an email response, if that's okay.
You mean like 17, 18 school year, 18, 19? Is that what you're
I mean, I think at least 3 years prior to pandemic. So that would be, I think the first pandemic year is 2019-20. So the three, yeah. Thank you for doing that math.
We'll get that to you.
Yeah, because every year we have this same summary discipline report, and on
Right.
the first slide, you click it, right? It's actually an Excel sheet, so we have that for every year.
Oh.
So we would essentially send you the one from like 17, 18, 16.
No, if it's embedded in here, I can get to
Well,
it.
I'm just giving an example that the 24, 25 is embedded in here. I'm just saying that that's the format we would send it to you in.
Okay.
Is that making sense?
It's hyperlinked.
Is it hyperlinked in here?
It is, yeah, when you, the next slide, yep, there you go, that one.
The actual report, okay.
The actual report, and that shows you by school,
Okay.
and also, there's one in there that shows you the 5-year comparison, started with 21, 22, but we have it before that, of course.
And I can get to that in that link.
That right there is just for 24, 25.
Right.
Oh, okay.
But we'll send you that same format for those 3
Perfect.
years prior.
Thank you.
to the pandemic.
Yep.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
That's easy, yep.
And I wanted to make sure that I also addressed Mr. Hershey's questions. I know, Dr. Walker, you talked about how we were lowest, our percentage was the lowest out of those 5 counties, right?
Right.
Have we explored what's different in our policy compared to those other school districts?
Yeah, sure. And so yeah, thank you, because it's compared to those particular ones. And so there's an assumption in that question, right, that policy is the driver to this lowest suspension rate, and I'm not sure I'm prepared to say that. So policy is a framework that gives principal the guidance as to how they can discipline, and you drive that, right? You say, here's what level 1 looks like, you can't suspend. Here's what level 2 looks like, you can do 5 days. If you want 6 to 10, you can do aggravating factors. Level 3, this is what this looks like in the number of days. And so, but that is separate from a principal deciding on whether in Johnny or Sarah's circumstance, whether they're going to suspend here. And so what I really think, it's really a testament to everything we've spoken to, is the lowest suspension rate is what we discussed here, right? Where we started off with the behavioral health framework, everything Dr. Gooch and our legendary principal right here is speaking to. That's what's contributing, I believe, to that lowest suspension rate.
So, Madam Chair, I can add to that. I think one of the clear differences is the student code of conduct. And so when we look at board policy, generally everybody's going to fall into the same area. But when you look at our student code of conduct, there are, I think, more robust requirements in terms of what schools have to do if a kid has a particular incident. And most school student codes of conduct that I see, they will sort of list what an incident is, and what the consequences are. And there's not necessarily steps that have to be taken before you apply something. So I think having those kind of safeguards in place is what's going to keep our numbers low. My experience has been, and I've had to review these, at the state level, and that is one of the differences that you see, that it is about what a district says you can or cannot do before you suspend someone. It is, I think, vastly different here, and I think, in my opinion, that is part of the reason that you see those low numbers. But then the part that we said we can't speak to is what those expectations are in another district.
Right, right. Thank you for that. And then finally, Mr. Hershey talks about or asks about how well our teachers and school staff feel supported with the current approach. And I think, having our principal here to speak on exactly like what she's seeing in her building with the behavior support coaches. I think I named them right. Okay. So is it safe to say that we need to figure out how to get more behavioral?
So I do want to add a point of clarification.
Okay.
We do have coach vacancies. They were, because of the budget, on hold, but gratefully Dr. Hill and Dr. Taylor have allowed us to start to hire for those. So we hope to bring on additional folks this spring.
Thank you for that point of clarification. Thank you.
And Ms. Gordon, as Dr. Walker and I were preparing for today, we do have the teacher working condition survey that does lend itself to how discipline practices are in fact measured in the district or in the school. And in the interim of that, we have talked about what is it that we can do to hear that feedback more consistently from our educators, from our building leaders, just as we can continue to look at this, refining this process. But we're always going to stay true on the collective leadership of restorative practice, those things that are grounded in research, those things that are alternative to out-of-school suspensions, in order to give our students the necessary supports that they need as they navigate through this.
Absolutely, and I cannot wait to hear the presentation on restorative practices. That is something near and dear to my heart, and I also am a firm believer, and I know that we are a large district and we have a lot of principals who, they run their schools very differently, but one key thing is understanding who we serve and the community in which our schools are in. So thank you so much for this, Dr. Hill.
Thank you.
And Dr. Gooch and Dr. Walker. And Principal. Thank you all.
So we're going to transition now, and coupled with this is our ensuring student well-being. We want to talk about seclusion and restraint. So we're going to get that presentation up and transition just for a moment.
What's that?
You know, you're privileged the whole time.
Thank you. Okay, all right.
That's right. So good afternoon again, and we have Ms. Lisa Allred as well as Ms. Heather Bowen, who's going to be with us and talk about some of the things that she is doing in her site in this topic of seclusion and restraint practices. Again, with our desired outcome, there are state and federal reporting requirements that we have to abide by for seclusion and restraint. We want to talk about those this afternoon. Look at our first semester seclusion and restraint data, and then outline what are those continued steps as we finish out this year and looking at refining our practices. Again, with our priority 2 of student disposition and well-being, that is coupled in this work as we are in alignment with our strategic plan. As mentioned with our discipline data, and I won't go into detail as I did in our previous presentation, but it's all grounded in our behavioral health framework as we continue to do this work and those things that we are looking at as we interact with any of our students who require or who may need seclusion and restraint.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. And so when looking at this, before there was usually a slide where we go into quite detail about the definitions, and so we thought that this was a good anchor slide to just stick to keep it far more simple here. But I do want to define it. Again, as board members, I know you know it, but for our friends in the media and also our community stakeholders, as central partners, I want to make sure that we are clear on the definitions here. And so let's distinguish them. So we've got physical restraint. This is really the hands-on. So for my parents, this is restricting movement with a student's body is really the most simplistic way I can put that. So mechanical restraint is very similar, right? This is, though, using some type of device to restrict. And I want to be clear here that mechanical restraint is definitely often generally prohibited in our schools. When we talk about seclusion, this is when a student is placed alone. That's a key thing. They're placed alone in a space and physically prevented from leaving. And what's not up here, but I just want to add it, is isolation. So isolation, that's when a student might be alone, but they're actually free to leave if they choose. So it's a subtle, but it's a very vital distinction that I wanted to highlight there. Also, as we get into the numbers, I want to clarify that, I live in this data every day, and it's a new, relatively newer data that we've been making sure we're capturing. I want to make sure that when looking at these definitions, the federal government and the state, they have two distinct ways of looking at it. So the federal government is kind of the big picture. When looking at this, they require us to report every single instance of seclusion or restraint, regardless really of the circumstance. They just want to know. They want to see the nationwide volume and the students of color, students with disabilities, so that's the bigger picture. In the state, then, they know that we're going to get all the instances of federal physical restraint, mechanical restraint, and seclusion. So the state then says they're going to make more of a targeted. So they aren't necessarily looking for us to have every single one reported to the state of North Carolina. Instead, they use the language really of, we want to know what's impermissible in the schools. And so what does that mean? They want to know if a restraint was used really inappropriately, if the grounds for it weren't right, or if any injury occurred. So if there's a time, sometimes we may show a couple different numbers. It's just, we're trying to be transparent and saying, well, this is what the federal government was and this is what the state wants. Thank you, Dr. Hill. So when looking at the really statistical landscape, right, this is an anchor slide that we often use here. And similar to the discipline data, we have 160,000 students, roughly. So it's vital to understand that seclusion and restraint impacts less than 1% of our student body. And now, while that indicates that our primary prevention strategies, I think, are vastly effective, because that number is manageable, right? We must take a closer look at this 371. And also, remember, we're doing this mid-year as well. So these aren't final numbers, and I'm going to talk more about how we are constantly adjusting as we look at this number. So we see the 371, but I often say that the data informs us, but when looking at this, the stories ground us. There's 371. In reality, again, just like we talked about the 8,000 students for discipline data, these are 371 families right now. And we recognize that behind every data point and every one that we look like, there's a child's dignity and parents' trust. And so while it's a small number, we want to make sure that we lift that up to say these 371 kids matter. They matter to us big time. And as you'll hear, of course, from Assistant Superintendent Allred and Director Bowling, restraint is never a first response. It's really about safety. And so while our goal is perhaps to do different in seclusion or restraint, there are times, and that's why the state says there are times when it's permissible. That's why it's in law, to say that there are times when we're just going to have to do that. One of the big things, and I'm really talking to our families now, right? Foster positive classrooms, and then notification to parents, just as Dr. Taylor sat here about Tyler Swanson's question, Chair Swanson's question about notification to parents. We have to call parents when we have a seclusion and when we have a restraint. Not 2 days later, not 3 days later. We got to let them know as soon as reasonably possible to make sure that they are aware. Thank you, Dr. Hill. So when looking at this, I want you to know that the technical, right? So I really appreciate our team here, and Director Woods is here, as well as our Senior Administrator, Dr. LaValle, and our Compliance Reporting Specialist, Jennifer Pratt. And they are really the key team that looks at the school staff reports, and we have incident reporting. And this is where we have to be strategic, and we have to review and talk. And this is the ongoing training and professional learning we're doing with schools constantly. Clarify and document, and ultimately, of course, we have to report to NCDPI here, and then just continual compliance monitoring that we need to do when looking at these certain cases. So I'm really appreciative of the team, and also with everything that schools are doing and principals to make sure to get this reporting right. First I want to, we're going to cover a lot of data as we have in the past a few times that I've shared this seclusion restraint. And I want to thank our partners in the media, particularly for taking a very diligent look at these preliminary numbers. We appreciate any type of external validation as we are getting into this. This is a living data set, and so I'll highlight some things that we have maybe adjusted in real time when looking at these particular like unique students, right? We talked, there's 371. And when we look at unique students then, by level, elementary, right, about 63% of all seclusion and or restraint is happening with our elementary students. This is something I'm always going to bring to the table as well when it comes to race, because when you disaggregate by race, that's when we see some perhaps unfortunate trends here, right? So about 192 of the particular students are black or African American here. And so sometimes it's difficult, of course, to talk about race and discipline, though it's a really key aspect here, and as well as we look at students with disabilities, which we're going to look at in a moment here. That's another trend that we have to be concerned with. So I've kept this slide 9 here, right, really for transparency's sake. However, we did a final walkthrough and really realized that our slide 11 has a level of precision for this reported acts by school level that we're going to focus on. And so in the interest of clarity and time, I'm not going to speak to this one right now, and we'll look at those particular updated numbers on slide 11. So if we could go to slide 10 here. This is going to look at the reported acts, again, by race, but the main point is just seeing that there's over 1,000, right, 371 students, but over really about 1,000 or so cases that we may have reported in seclusion or restraint here. And so that's the breakdown when it comes to mechanical, physical, and seclusion. So let's go to the next one. Thank you. So this is where I want to highlight some updates to the particular data. So let me highlight that the physical restraint, that number, right, and our need to be absolute here, that is for the whole year, for last year, for 24. That is not the number for mid-year. So that 1120, change it to 628 in your mind, right? It's 628 that we had for that period. So it's 628 versus 768, right? Okay, thank you for that. And also, again, this is living data. It's not static, right? So that was a good catch in our recent review here. I also want to highlight seclusion. So the seclusion number we see is 264 for this time last year. When I came before, it was 313. So I presented 313, but right after the meeting, right, again, we saw some things with the data and noticed that, oh, it wasn't 313, it's actually 264, right? So if you took time to say, hey, what did I present last time? It wasn't the 264, it was the 313. Again, the numbers are constantly being looked at, and we've identified certain things where we're maybe over-reporting or under-reporting, so we're sticking to that here. So I want to say that over the past couple of years, we've seen these thousands of reported cases. And the win here for accountability is that we're reporting. I don't leave anything with the board. Board, we're reporting. Schools are reporting. Families, we are reporting. Right? Schools are after essential partners, community members, friends in the media. Wake County is reporting this data, and we are, I think, doing quite an excellent job as we get into this. And there's growing pains. We had a certain version that was internal that we were capturing seclusion restraint. And then now, everybody in the state now is moving to Infinite Campus. So we have somewhat of an implementation dip as we're getting to know that platform as well. And so I wanted to highlight that when it comes to these particular numbers here. Again, a lot of this mimics. It's not really at this point where often we might want to say, well, are we up in numbers or were we down in numbers? And I'm really at the point where these are just the numbers and this is the snapshot of where we are now. We're really still a few years out to saying what does it all mean? And as we are continually doing professional learning with our schools, for them to completely understand those definitions and know when there's the permissible and kind of the impermissible kind of seclusion and restraints here. So we can go to the last one. So there's a few things to remember here, right? We have the race challenge, right? That majority of these are Black African-American students. They're mostly in elementary, right? That's the main thing I want you to take, and that's been consistent. And then lastly, of course, we see about 82% of them are with our exceptional children. And so therefore, that's clearly a target that we have to focus on and intervene on. And I think at that point, I'm good to pass it on to Assistant Superintendent Ms. Allred.
Thank you.
Yes.
So thank you all for hearing us today. I want you to know that Special Ed Services is continuing the work to support recording, reporting, and reducing the instances of seclusion restraint, and I'm excited to be here to share with you some of the continued where we're continuing to do the work. And as we do that, I'm really excited to have Heather Bowling here with us. Heather is the director of the Bridges program, and her program supports some of the neediest children as it relates to behavior. Ms. Bowling leads her program to use data explicitly to inform their practices, including data related to seclusion and restraint. And I'm excited to have her share some of the things that she's doing. She's one of our rock stars, and I'm glad she's here with us.
Thank you, Ms. Allred. Board, thank you for having us. So the Bridges program is a public separate school, and that supports Wake County Public Schools.
We serve students who are already receiving special education services, so all of our students have IEPs. Their IEPs and needs are specific to intense and extreme behavioral health needs. We do serve students with all different categories of disabilities. Those disabilities are interfering with school success at their regular education or base school. And those schools have typically designed multiple supports and resources for those students' needs to be met before they are referred to our program. Placements at the Bridges program are a part of the continuum of special education services, and therefore those determinants are discussed within the context of an IEP team. The Bridges program is the most restrictive special education elementary school placement on the Wake County continuum of special education services. I do want to share as a disclaimer, the information about how we support at our program is not how all schools support. So the supports that I'm going to offer to you all is specific to things that we've designed at the Bridges program. The Bridges program reviews seclusion and restraint data for each child on a recurring cycle during our team meetings, and if you were at a regular education school, it would be similar to an intervention team meeting. And we formally meet during IEP meetings for behavior intervention plans reviews, and we time out those behavior intervention reviews for plan reviews for our students according to student need within a multi-tiered system of support. Our data examination and analysis includes individual student, class-wide, school-wide, and peer comparison data around these constructs. We also analyze small group and school-wide data trends, and across those supports, we're looking at database problem solving aligned to our school improvement efforts. Starting this school year, we made some very clear determinants in how we were going to address our seclusion and restraint data, and we did so in the following ways. So we continue the following practices. We're going to continue implementing a population-based standard treatment protocol, tiered instruction and intervention system for students with extreme and intense behavioral health needs. We're going to continue implementing our Tier 1 research and evidence-based practice of positive behavior intervention systems as a proactive and preventative practice for seclusion and restraint. And we have that model in place for individual students, group contingencies, and school-wide. We support our staff with a staff wellness infrastructure as a part of our school improvement model, and we support our staff with skills related to the community resilience model. We support them with staff mini skills in terms of how to implement different tactics of CPI. We also support wellness circles, and our student support services team has some very specialized offerings for our staff to support their wellness each month. All of our staff are trained on CPI techniques, and that's not just the physical restraints, but also the verbal de-escalation techniques that come without formalized training. Throughout our school, we focus on the authentic source of using the CPI decision-making matrix that helps cue our staff into when it's appropriate to restrain a student. We use trauma and resilience-informed and aware practices, such as using the community resiliency model, as well as restorative justice and restorative practices. We have a high staff to student ratio. We have 6 students to 3 adult ratios at all time, and that is to promote and ensure optimized safety throughout the school day. We are a school-based mental health site, so our students do have access, if they meet specific criteria, to a therapist on site. Our staff is very is very much supported by coaching and feedback. So our staff is provided direct coaching and feedback during and or after a restraint or a seclusion event, and that support is offered by our coordinating teacher for behavioral health or in collaboration with myself and our lead teacher as administrators. We will continue to document seclusion as a part of our student standard programming and our Bridges program behavior intervention plans. By documenting that in our behavior intervention plans, that creates a very transparent and longitudinal documentation of seclusion and restraint. We also continue to document that in a behavior intervention plan so that we can regularly review that seclusion documentation for a student, and when we see trending needs, we might adjust our practices, and that also includes elevating student voice. For example, sometimes a student does request for that door to be closed even though we would wish for it to be in isolation. Some of our students have trauma-based experiences, and we use that to guide and support our practices for them. We also continue to use formal and informal restorative justice practices when there are unsafe behavioral events that result in seclusion or restraint. We support that student to student as well as student to staff. We're going to upgrade and have been working to upgrade the following practices at the Bridges program. Working on upgrading our coaching and feedback supports when staff are supporting a seclusion or restraint. Assessing our determinants for holding debriefs when involved essential parties have supported a seclusion or restraint. And we're looking to increase those in quantity as appropriate, specifically if we see trending supports with specific students. We also are holding staff accountable for best practices regarding seclusion and restraint and continuing to upgrade our detailed documentation of those events, inclusive of documentation of attempts to when we're opening the seclusion door. We're also continuing to upgrade our seclusion and restraint data in our quarterly review, which makes that data analysis very transparent with our staff, and we problem solve that as necessary. We started the following practices during the 25-26 school year, which include the following. Our leadership team created a Bridges program seclusion look-for walkthrough tool to inspect the expectations for the seclusion best practices. We implemented that tool, and we use that data as school improvement to enhance the transparency and the coaching and feedback for those best practices to occur. We do that once a quarter through our quarterly reviews. We have also, as a program, we have paid for and are beginning to apply life-based crisis intervention level 1 online training. And the following essential parties are partaking in that: our coordinating teacher for behavioral health, our crisis assistants. Our crisis assistants are kind of our first responders for dysregulated students. And that is being constructed and supported in a very intentional way to guide those teammates through facilitation and coaching. Myself and the lead teacher of the Bridges program we're also completing the refresher because she and I have actually already taken that course. And then something that sounds quite simple but has really enhanced, in my opinion, support structures is we've posted the decision-making matrix in specific locations throughout the school that kind of gives you a queuing system as when it's appropriate to restrain a student. And we've put those in very specific locations intentionally based on where those restraints may take place in the school building. And then lastly, we have delivered intentionally designed mini skills professional learning relating to skilling up our teammates on CPI de-escalation techniques during staff meeting. So our staff meetings are every Wednesday. They're very short. They're 20-minute meetings, but we have found ways to take out snippets of CPI de-escalation techniques, role play those, and build our muscle, so to speak, when we're talking with students and practicing with one another.
Thank you. I just want to say before I move on that most of that was developed just as a conversation she and I had after last year. When we did this, I came to her and said, because as you can imagine, a lot of our restraint seclusion happens at the Bridges program. And so we just said, what can we do to continue? And this is what Heather does when you bring her, hey, we need to work on this, and she takes it and runs with it. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you. So these are the topics that I want us to talk about. If you look at them, they look very similar to the ones we talked to you about in September, but we've made progress in all these areas, and so I wanted to update you in what we've done since September. So for our seclusion and restraint team, a group of 7 individuals has taken on the work of seclusion and restraint within special ed services. This task force that we put together has a wide range of experiences. And this year they've been utilizing seclusion and restraint from last year to look at those numbers to find trends and patterns. This group is using the data and targeting specific sites for training. The de-escalation training is in person for some and asynchronous for others based on the data to help staff de-escalate themselves and others and students when they become involved in highly emotional situations with behavior. Additionally, this seclusion and restraint team are continuing to review any spaces that are used for seclusion to ensure that it meets the requirements for the safety of the students. And the current work that they're about to start will be looking at this year's data from September through the end of first semester and start making adjustments to the targeted schools based on that. These are specialized staff that we're using. We continue to collaborate with the Autism Society of North Carolina for coaching for specific teachers with students utilizing registered behavior technicians and board certified behavior analysts. They continue to supervise
a couple of our staff. I'm excited to report that one of our staff passed our boards, and we now have a board-certified behavior analyst in special education services, which we're really excited about. SES and Special Ed Services and Autism Society are in the beginning stages of developing some video modules documenting the use of evidence-based practices within our own classrooms. They're going into Wake County classrooms, modeling that information and be able to video that so that it can be shared with other teachers throughout the district. We also are able to deploy the social emotional coaches that you see there. We have 8 of those currently. We have 3 registered behavior technicians that we're using. We've contracted with those throughout the district. And we continue to contract for board-certified behavior analysts, and we'll be adding to those BCBAs throughout the end of this year, beginning in next year. I want to share with you all of the training opportunities that we're using with staff. The new training opportunities, we hope to increase the capacity of staff to manage behaviors of students with complex behavioral needs. We have new FBA, BIP training that has been developed and provided to all of special ed services, as well as currently, since November, we've trained about 300 people. We're developing an asynchronous version of that training because we know that it's hard to get teachers out of schools, and so we're giving another option for them to be able to do this asynchronously. The new de-escalation training that I spoke to you about is being required to targeted schools where they have high numbers of seclusion and or restraint. That's approximately 40 schools that we're going to require either go through the in-person or the asynchronous training by the end of the school year. Next year, we are collaborating with DPI to train all of our SES staff and all special ed student teachers in Wake County on high leverage practices, which when done with fidelity will decrease the escalation of students. We're especially training some kindergarten teachers. We've asked for schools to send us 2 regular ed kindergarten teachers in each school that we are providing some specific training to help with those children in kindergarten that have extreme behaviors. This is particularly important when we think about those children that are coming into kindergarten who've never been in school before, and so we want to make sure those kindergarten teachers really have those particular practices to help them regulate as they're getting used to what school is and that sort of thing. And then finally this summer we're starting some specialized IA training that sort of mimics the training that registered behavior technicians go through. Autism Society is helping us with that, so we are going to train all of our special ed IAs to have that very specialized behavioral training. And then collaboration, our collaboration partners haven't changed, but we are increasing support with that. We are beginning bridge builder sessions. We have 2 scheduled for between now and the end of this year. We'll be in the Northeast in May, and we're working to secure a place in the southern region in June where we'll talk about all of these things. Additionally, we'll talk about the regional model and how we're rolling that out. We'll talk about all the PD we're providing and give parents some additional information. What our plan is for next year is to do that bridge builder session every month in a different area throughout the school, and we'll have a specific topic that we're going to address with families. We are really excited to be collaborating with Student Support Services. We have a behavioral continuum meeting that some of our behavioral leadership and school climate and some of those are working together. I can't wait to bring you all information about restorative practices, but I want you to know that the first round of that training is next week with Central Services, and we'll do a two-day training with them, and we'll be bringing you some more information about that. And then additionally, we're collaborating with our Student Support Services with school-based mental health. And then Additionally, we always want to collaborate with our community partners, especially Alliance and ASNAC, to make sure those families have the services that they need to wrap around our students, as we're trying to make sure they have the family support they need as well as the support they need in schools. And with that, what questions do you have?
I will turn it right on over. Well, thank you all for the presentation, but I will start with Ms. Evans.
Thank you. I have 3 questions. So you said most incidents of seclusion and restraint, or maybe just seclusion, help clarify, at Bridges? Is it both?
A lot, it's not I don't know if it's most or not, because I don't know what the numbers are, but a lot of those happen at Bridges, and we would expect that because those are some of our neediest children as it relates to behavior, yeah.
Sure, and so I was trying to get a sense of, so maybe it's not most, but I would like to have a sense of
I don't know.
Yes.
how far it's tipped at Bridges.
I think we could just use some raw numbers to get a taste of that. So if we think of 371 unique students,
Right.
Director Bowling, how many students would you say, what you have overall, and then how many may be impacted?
So we cap at 36. Since I've been at their program since 22-23, we've not had 36. We've had up to 24 in one school year. So those would be 24 individual students. So not exactly maybe the tipping point that one might assume with the numbers.
Right, because it could be, a student could have more than one occurrence.
But
Maybe I need to correct that, in that I wasn't saying it was the number of students, I was saying the number of incidents.
Sure.
Because we would, so to be clear about
That's
that.
helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question, actually, because of time, I'll just skip that one. So, you were talking about hiring board-certified behavior analysts. Is that the same thing as the coaches, or is that something
The
else?
social emotional coaches is different.
Okay.
Board-certified behavior analysts have very specific training and applied behavior analysis.
Okay.
And so they help us target in on, this is the behavior, and these are the antecedents. So how do we take data differently to really tease out what those triggers are? And they help us really hone in much more specifically than our SELCs, social emotional learning coaches.
And did you have like a hiring freeze as well that's been released, or for that?
We do, but some of that's being done through our CEIS funds because we're disproportionate. So we have some leeway to continue to do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you for emphasizing the collaboration with the parents and doing all the things that you're planning on doing around the school district. I think it's very, very good. You know, the whole aspect of de-escalation, you know, I work with a patient population and brain injuries, and so, you know, we certainly are in same wavelength in terms of, like, you know, the importance of not only understanding the situation and the antecedent, you know, kind of situations that can bring on an escalation of a behavior. So I think it's good that, you know, we're looking at that providing that training to many staff. So I'm really appreciative of that. So I don't have a particular question. I just want to say thank you.
Well, I just want to say, Dr. Walker, I really like the way that you framed the 371 stories around families having or affecting families' trust and dignity. I think, you know, setting this information up in that way and in that manner makes us acknowledge that we have some work to do around the trust and things that we're doing around special education. But my question really is around the Bridge program. What learned lessons or interventions are we having constant communication with our regular education special education classroom educators.
I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. What's the collaboration between what's happening at Bridges
Yes.
and special ed and what's happening?
Yes.
So we have some plans for that. We've talked about some of those things. My dream would be that maybe not all of the schools, but especially our EBS programs, because many of those children are the ones that transition to Bridges, to make sure that some of the more intensive supports that Bridges is providing are also providing with that EBS. And so that's something that Special Ed Services leadership has talked about how do we connect the staff at Bridges with some of the staff at the EBS programs, and maybe the leadership at Bridges with some of the principals that are supervising those EBS programs, and how we can make sure that the best practices that are happening here are happening throughout the district.
Thank you. And then my final question is around slide 17, where you talked about the specialized staff. I was trying to capture the notes as quickly as I could, but I heard you say there are 8 social emotional learning coaches, right?
That's correct.
You said 3 board certified behavior analysts?
So 3 registered behavior technicians that we are currently contracting for.
Okay. And then what about, there's only 1 board certified behavior analyst?
We have 1 that is on staff now.
Okay.
I will also say that the Autism Society of North Carolina, those folks that we collaborate with, are also board certified. They're BCBAs as well, and they help us. That's who we pull in when we really need some help right now. What we want to do is be contracting with BCBAs ourselves so that they are in their area regularly, and we have more access to them, because Autism Society of North Carolina, they serve the whole state, and so we need some of our own, and that's what we're working toward.
Yeah, go ahead, Doctor. Go ahead, Mr. Swanson.
So, thank you for diving into this and some updates and just seeing where we were last year versus this year. I see that there's some gains that's being made, but of course there's still always more work that has to be done, which starts with changing and shifting human behavior.
Correct.
And then having key partnerships with families. But I'm wondering, and I saw the slide that referenced about training the IAs, instructional assistants. But if those IAs choose to get those certifications, is that additional pay increase for them, or how does that, and I hate to say that with the budget that's being developed, but if we're requiring folks to do more and having more skill sets, should we also compensate folks for going above and beyond their duties? So that's just some of the, the caveats to this is yes, we would love to have those folks, but to do the work and have those trainings, but also understanding, just like educators, the more you invest in them, there has to be some compensation somewhere. So hopefully as those discussions are going on, that would be a priority, I think, of this board of supporting special education as a whole to the best of our ability. So that's just a comment, not really it's a comment and a question.
I do want to clarify. The IA training that we'll be providing will not lead to them being a registered behavior technician.
Correct.
I just want to make sure you all understand, because that requires the training and passing a test. I love that you always are the ones saying, hey, special ed needs more, and we appreciate that. But they won't have an additional, I just want to make sure y'all know, they won't have an additional certification. We just hope they'll have additional skills from our end. If they choose to do that, then they would be on a different structure, and quite honestly, Chair Swanson, we don't have that structure because we don't have any hired RBTs. They're all contracted, and those folks do get paid at a higher rate. Yeah.
I wonder if there is room for us to lead in that direction, though, and having some of our IAs be able to get that certification. I think that would definitely benefit us greatly.
I agree.
Well, if there are no further questions or concerns, thank you all, and we are adjourning at 4:55. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.